We move on then to item 5 of the agenda, which is the paper on patient and public voice. Tim, over to you.
Thank you, Malcolm. So the paper covers a lot of ground. That's reflective of the fact there's an awful lot of activity going on. I'm just going to highlight three areas for particular focus, but I would, I'm sure everyone's read the paper, but there are some important things in there in relation to a whole range of other programmes. The first thing just to highlight really is the care.data initiative, and just to remind members of the board, commissioning can only function, particularly if it's commissioning of outcomes, if we have the data with which to make some analysis of the outcomes that, in a sense, we're purchasing on behalf of patients. And for more than a decade now, the NHS has basically been running itself on a very thin sliver of data that flows from hospitals. We've broadly no insight that would enable comparative analysis of outcomes from primary care or mental health or most of the care context that we are commissioning for our patients. And so one of the most important priorities the board set when NHS Commissioning Board and subsequently NHS England was established was that we should make data transformation a priority. And this is really the first part of that programme. What we're doing here, simply put, is extending the existing arrangements for what are called the hospital episode statistics to general practice. And the programme became very public this month because we decided that we wanted to ensure patients were fully aware of the uses to which their own data was being put. So we launched a household leaflet drop with guidance from the Information Commissioner in an effort to meet best practice in relation to public awareness of such an important use of people's own data. The actual data service itself starts in July, and at that point NHS commissioners will be able to get access to data that will finally link, as it were, the narrative of what happens to a patient across the primary and secondary care story. So amazing it may seem, but so far NHS services have had no real idea at all of the quality of care that's being received as people do travel in the complexity of their lives through primary and secondary care. And that starts in July. A linkage service which will be established by our partners at the Health and Social Care Information Centre. The programme has been designed in very close collaboration with the BMA and the RCGP, and as well as with the Information Commissioner and a whole range of other stakeholders, voluntary organisations, patient groups and others. But it was always going to be controversial because there are people who I think quite reasonably have genuine suspicions and concerns about the way in which the state, the NHS, perhaps in particular, but public bodies take seriously confidentiality and privacy. And we have done, I hope, everything we can to reassure people that we will meet the very highest standards in relation to ensuring the priority around privacy and confidentiality. And it was for that reason that the government agreed that we would go beyond the provisions of the Data Protection Act in this instance and give patients and citizens the right to, in effect, opt out altogether from this programme if they chose to do so. Under the terms of the Data Protection Act, which is how the health and care system has been governed, as indeed all parts of our society are governed in relation to data, a person has the right to object to their data being extracted from a data controller, but for that objection to have to be upheld by the data controller. And in practice, what that means here is that the GP, being the data controller for us in relation to our GP records, has to agree with a patient when a patient says they don't want their data to be shared with somebody else. What we've done here is say that we don't think that's enough. We don't think that gives enough priority to people's rights to choose not to share their data, and we've said that when somebody makes an objection, whether or not the data controller, in this case the GP, objects to it, that objection will be upheld. So a de facto opt-out, it strikes a new standard in public services for recognition of the importance of people's rights to determine with whom they share their data. And of course, in the end, we want as many people as possible to share their data, but we need to make the right arguments, demonstrate the right benefits case to patients. So that's sort of where the broad context. There have been on the whole, looked at broadly, actually the media response to this initiative has been pretty positive. But there have been a number of important kind of question marks raised about it, and in particular, some reports have suggested, for example, that this data may be sold for insurance purposes, for setting of premiums, for example, or to other third parties who don't have any direct interest in patient care. And I'd just like to clarify for the board that is actually illegal under the terms of this data extraction. And the specifics are that at this first phase of this journey towards a truly modern data infrastructure in the NHS, only people involved in patient care will be able to access the de-identified data, the individual level data, after it's been linked by the information centre. And at the moment that is limited to commissioners. The research industry, of course, will, for the research, for the life sciences industry, for those people, for example, including us pursuing genomics as a very important priority for the future of the health service, we need to make our arguments that researchers also should be able to get controlled access to this information. But at the moment, the only permissions exist for people, commissions included, in delivery of direct patient care. So just to make that point, and the second related point to clarify is that the data is not being sold. The information centre is permitted to recover costs, but there is no basis on which it can, quote, sell for some profitable purpose this data to outsiders. So that's been that's the situation. Once the linkage service has been tested and we've been able to kind of start assessing the benefits of having linked data across the pathway for commissioners and others in the health service, we intend to move quite quickly, but again in the context of an appropriate public debate, to expand the availability of data from hospital services. At the moment, as I said, we're operating on a pretty thin sliver of insight into the quality of hospital services. We intend to expand that over time as well, and of course crucially to expand our insights into other key areas like social care as well. So this is an ongoing programme which has just started in January. So to obviously take questions on that in a second. Other key things to bring people's attention to relates to, in a way, a parallel programme to try and maximise the benefits that technology, IT, can bring to not only the data flows in the health service, but also to putting patients really in control of their condition, of their wellness. And there's been an awful lot of work gone on to start looking at how we can make technical things like interoperability between different health and care providers, the ability of people to share data in real time so that doctors at the bedside or paramedics in the ambulance can properly access very safely and confidentially, but in a very direct clinical way, data about individual patients, as well as to start programmes meeting the obligations we've got of giving patients access to their online records in general practice, giving them the facility to book appointments and so on and so forth. In a sense, patients online, and really working on the supply side of the health service to get to maximise its effectiveness and intelligence. And you'll see from the paper, for example, that we have now launched the technology fund, the Safer Wards, Safer Hospitals initiative, which is part of a programme to broadly put £1 billion of capital into the business of incentivising electronic records deployment in trusts in health. So these are very important initiatives which I just wanted to bring to the board's attention, and obviously very happy to take questions. And then finally, just to re-emphasise the point that David made at the beginning around the Expo, apart from it being a fantastic celebration of innovation, it also brings together a number of really important initiatives in their own right. So, for example, NHS Change Day, which is an amazing phenomenon, encouraging hundreds of thousands of staff and others across the NHS to kind of volunteer to do something differently in the pursuit of an excellent health and care system. That Change Day is launched at Expo, or is going to come to its fulfilment at Expo, and this year we're hoping, I think, to get over 500,000 individual people committing to doing something differently in that pursuit. We're also going to be launching the Citizens' Assembly, on which I'd like to just thank Victor and Kieran in particular for their work over the last few weeks. And that's a journey towards really making real participation in the decision-making processes of NHS England, as well as more broadly across the health service. So there'll be a lot of activity there in relation to the Assembly, building up towards the AGM in September, where we expect to have a more formal kind of engagement with the Citizens' Assembly as the co-design work that's been going on with all sorts of people gradually comes to its conclusion. So actually, I'll leave it there. Those are the key things I was going to bring people's attention to.
Right, thank you very much. Let me invite comments, questions from members of the board. Jane.
I just wanted to add something to Tim's comment about Expo, and just to re-emphasise the fact that we're also launching the Kate Granger Compassionate Care Awards at Expo. So we will be announcing the winners of those awards. Kate Granger is a doctor who works in Yorkshire who's terminally ill and has done a lot of work around raising awareness of terminal illness and the way patients are cared for. And so we are working with her to launch those awards, and we'll do that for both an individual and a team. And that will be the first of an annual award for, with Kate's name addressed. And I think that's really important, and we're hoping that Kate will be present at Expo to both talk about her experiences but also to present those awards. And I think that's something that's really important for the NHS as a whole and for those providing NHS care. So I just wanted to re-emphasise that as we're talking about Expo.
Thank you.
And actually, thank you, Jane, for that, because I also should have said that alongside the Kate Granger Awards, we're going to be launching the NHS Participation Awards, which are for which there's been a huge response, which have a variety of categories, just to really in terms of staff and volunteers and others being rewarded, and excellence being highlighted. And I've just noticed that Jackie Ashley, Andrew Marr's wife, is going to be among the judges for that award. So I do feel we're beginning to genuinely start gathering a kind of sense of social pace around our promotion of participation in health and care.
Moira.
Thanks, Malcolm, and thank you to Tim for a very full report. It's really helpful, actually. But I just wanted to ask a question about one bit you didn't pick up on, which is the widening digital participation, and whether, again, that we are working with local government in doing that, or as has happened in the past, again, ploughing our own furrow, really.
Yeah, so this is, again, I'm sorry I didn't mention it because it's so important, but time is so limited. So as the board will remember, last year we engaged in a partnership with what was UK Online, is now the Tinder Foundation, which works with around 4,000 centres, libraries, other local authority centres in local communities across the country to promote online learning, really, to people who would otherwise perhaps find it difficult or don't have the facilities to go online. We specifically launched a programme in partnership with them to look at health literacy, health digital literacy, and we wanted to take 100,000 people from to help them learn how best to extract value individually from all the online resources and other tools that we're developing, and others are as well. And that's been an amazing success. So I think already 50,000 people have gone through that course, very disadvantaged communities, but very much in partnership with local community-based services, I would say. I'm not sure about the Tinder Foundation brings together all sorts of different organisations, and we're very much hoping, subject to sort of budgetary review, that we can repeat that next year. I do think this is a really, if we're encouraging people to channel shift, to take responsibility and control, and a very important channel through which we want them to do that is digital, it is very incumbent upon us to demonstrate leadership in the context of equalities, digital inclusion and so on. So I think this is a very important programme.
Points. One on that, I think, and also to recognise things that other people are doing. So Age UK, for example, are buddying young people with old people, and so it doesn't have to be us, but we need to play into the system. And just bring us back to the privacy question. And I think my sense is that people are broadly very comfortable sharing data for their care, for the future of other people's care. Similarly, research, which will benefit the next person with a similar condition. But nervousness around, would it be possible for insurance companies to extract this data and correlate it with something else and make decisions? So what kind of assurance is there around that?
So we've put lots of resources onto the internet to try and explain this, but very quickly, if I may, Chairman, there are broadly three classes of data that are involved in this programme. The first is completely anonymised, aggregate data of a sort that's by region or by city or by unit, but completely anonymised, which will be freely available to anybody at all. So just in an open data way, data that's not, where there is no risk whatsoever of any kind of re-identification.
Like ONS,
yes,
mortality
just like
stats
statistics,
or something.
exactly. So that will be available to everybody, and there's been confusion about that because some people have said that, well, somehow that will be available to everybody. There's a second class of data which is called pseudonymized data, which is a very unfortunate and complex word, but this is data that is de-identified, but which is then provided at this stage only to NHS organisations involved in patient care. And it's where the identifiers, the real identifiers have been removed, but which still enables people to look at quite individual level at the sort of things that are happening in healthcare. So it's individual level de-identified data. And that's called pseudonymized, horrible technical word. Now, there are concerns, theoretical ones. To my knowledge, there's never been an example of actual re-identification taking place, that even with all the identifiers stripped off, somehow a clever hacker or somebody could triangulate the data with other databases and sort of identify a person in that way. Just to make the point that, that is a theoretical risk, and I absolutely can't deny it exists, and we must take it seriously, even though it hasn't actually happened. So for that kind of data, as has been the historic case with the hospital data for many years before, anybody who accesses it has to sign a contract which makes it both a civil and criminal offence to attempt even to re-identify it. And at the moment, the only people who could be given such a contract are people who work in the NHS or who are looking directly at NHS patient care. So I feel we're very protected on the theoretical risk of re-identification of that sort of data. And then identifiable data, there is no one who can get access to identifiable data at all, other than under specific parliamentary exemptions. So the debate has really focused on this second layer of de-identified individual level data, and as I say, the contractual obligations are those that have existed historically, and where we and the Information Commissioner and other bodies have very strong confidence will very, very firmly protect the confidentiality of people.
Could I just follow that up, Tim? I think that's a very clear explanation. Thank you for that. I mean, it seems to me that your first category of completely anonymised is going to be a fantastic resource for epidemiological observation and insight. The second category brings us back to this issue of research. I mean, you're going to have a fantastic database which we can mine for the purposes of ensuring that we commission wisely. We've also got fantastic universities in this country, and when you were talking about this category at the outset, you talked about the data being available to better inform commissioning. But we also, I think, are bringing to the board, in perhaps not the next meeting, but the following meeting, Bruce's research strategy. Quite interested to know how these would align. I mean, we've got a duty to undertake research. We're about to generate phenomenal database, the likes of which is not known elsewhere in the world, and a real opportunity to align our research agenda with this resource that's coming to us. Would you anticipate that researchers, subject to the contract, would have access to the pseudonymized data, or would you assume solely to the anonymized data?
Well, researchers certainly want to get access to the pseudonymized data, and historically they have had access under contract. Universities, people like the Nuffield Trust and others have had access to this data under contract to the hospital data. The process for organisations, researchers to apply for access to it is well established, and there is a board, a committee which considers these applications. So I would anticipate the research sector will be applying for permission, and to some extent, no doubt the process of approvals will be informed by the context of the current debate that's happening as we speak. I mean, so I suppose it depends in the end what we collectively within the health and care service, those who are tasked with the job of deciding who and who should not get access to this kind of data, decide what research means. And obviously there is a real public, quite understandable concern that at one end research might mean market research and somehow lead to sort of junk mail and insurance premium and so on. And at the other end, clearly, massive value in genomics and life sciences research. But this is a debate that we need to have, and we're going to be having it, and everyone just needs to start making their case, I think.
Bruce, do you want to add anything to that before I bring in Margaret?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The data for hospitals has been available for many years. And there's been a massive loss of opportunity by the fact that we haven't been able to link that data to primary care, where most of the activity in the NHS goes on. And as a consequence, we haven't been able to understand, to the extent that we might, how patient flows move through our NHS, where demand lies, what type of diseases attract what kind of outcomes. So in a sense, what Tim is proposing is not just a nicety to do, it's something that we should do. I think we have a kind of moral obligation, really, to understand how our NHS serves its patients and how it does that well. And we also have an obligation, I think, as a commissioning board to ensure that that data is used effectively, and I think Tim has done a good job in ensuring that the appropriate safeguards are put in place. But we also have, I think, an obligation to use the data in a way that will not only improve the clinical the clinical understanding of our NHS, but also a better understanding of the disposition of our services both now and for the future. So I think this is an essential endeavour on which we should embark on.
Okay, Margaret, and then Victor.
Tim, another cracking set of initiatives. Care.data is really just fantastically exciting, and you explain it really well. My question is related to the third category of I suppose, identifiable data. Essentially, if the individual is to feel a real trust in the system, so that we don't get the sort of mass opt-out that would make the whole system will render it inoperable, the data controller needs really to be trusted. And when you spoke, you talked about the GP as data controller, which is absolutely fine. With an integrated system, we've got more than one data controller, presumably, because you'd have the possibility of transfer of data from the GP to the social care operative, whoever that might be, in certain situations. So you might actually have a situation in which you don't have the GP as data controller. How do we get that continued assurance across that piece that would give patients satisfaction, that, so to prevent the sort of opt-out that in numbers that would undermine the system?
Yeah, so that's a really, in a way, you've asked a very complex question, and perhaps to some extent I can take it slightly outside the meeting, but broadly, the law is really explicit that when direct care for patients is involved, then there are all sorts of criminal sanctions in relation to breaches of confidentiality, which will cover the sort of the primary uses of the data between, say, health and social care. So where it's transferring between clinical staff, what we're talking about here is data which is being used for secondary uses. So it is in the, obviously it's directly of interest to patients, but it's not literally at the bedside. It is determining the shape of services. It's allowing for analysis of outcomes. And in that case, the law is currently very explicit that there is only one organisation that, other than the treating physician or clinician, who is allowed to handle identifiable data, and that's the Health and Social Care Information Centre. That is the only legal safe haven that's allowed to hold it. So a question we ask, and everybody should be asking, is how much confidence do we have in the security and firewall around the Health and Social Care Information Centre? And I can assure you an enormous amount of work, as you would expect, goes on in relation to that particular issue. So I think so there's a question mark about, is it safe? Could the information centre be hacked or whatever? And there are all sorts of safeguards there. But the issue is that in this context, the data controller remains the GP. That the individual patient or citizen is able to opt out at any point. That in the event that they opt out, the data is destroyed. And that's how we've operated it. So it's a sort of statutory and Data Protection Act issue. Yeah.
Thank you, Victor.
Points, because you talk a lot about the data. On the data issue, I want to kind of turn the argument round on its head, because I think that people's concerns about the data aren't just about the NHS. It's also about data generally. You know, we've just had, there's a guy living in Russia telling us everything we need to know about everything, and I think there's a context here. So I wonder whether one of the ways we might reassure the public is if on a regular basis, maybe annually, there was some kind of NHS England report which said, this is how the data's been used, these are the achievements that we've have been made as a result of this, what is in NHS a revolutionary shift, but in other industries is pretty vanilla, it's pretty standard stuff. I mean, you know, Tesco's hold an awful more data probably on each of us than the NHS, but I think we have a duty to kind of almost report back in an honest and transparent way as to what happened. So, I don't know, maybe some kind of annual report that said, this is how much data we collected, this is what we did with it, this is how the public, individuals, communities benefited from it. And, you know, I would say this, particularly those communities at the sharp end of the inverse care law. So there's a sense that it's not all data going in and nothing coming out. And your bit of this organisation appears to be capable of doing that, because you have an overview of the whole process, so therefore you must be able to have an overview of how the whole process is being used and indeed abused. I think one of the things about this report is that we ought to be really honest about actually where there might be some issues about the use of the data. So that's the one thing. Secondly, on the Citizens' Assembly, I just wanted to point out that there are two things going on with the Citizens' Assembly. The first is we're designing something which will hold a mirror up to NHS England, and we're hoping to be able to say something about that journey at the Expo. But I'm also concerned that we look inwards and not just outwards. I think this stuff, which refers to your point one on your 6 priorities, we shouldn't underestimate the massive shift in culture this will involve to virtually every leader in the NHS. If we're serious about this, and it's not window dressing, then it's a massive cultural challenge to form and function. And one of the pieces of work that we are doing as part of the Citizens' Assembly is actually engaging the leadership of NHS England in the implications of having something called the Citizens' Assembly on how they lead. And it's just worth pointing that out. And I guess the third thing is a reference back to your presentation, which I found very comprehensive and it really almost doesn't do justice to the amount of work that's been done. But I would like a sense of what will it look like then in 5 years, because you're doing the work, that's clear, but I would like a clearer sense of what will it look like from the viewpoint of a consumer in any town who might be using this stuff. What will it mean for us, the patient and the public? Almost a bit of a clearer sense of, and I would like to see that view taken from those people who are least likely to access this stuff now, and because if it works for them, it'll work for everyone else. So I'm to be honest with you, I think the middle classes do fine. I'd like a clearer picture of that, because that gives us it gives me a sense of what we're aiming for, and how we'll know when we've got there in relation to all this stuff.
Yeah.
Do you want to
Can I just
answer that?
very
Something
quickly?
you want to bring back to a future meeting with further elaboration?
Well, I think the idea of an annual report is a really good one. I think we should do that across the system. I mean, without going to the details of a conversation we need to have at a board meeting soon, there is now going to be a proposal for a new thing called the National Information Board, which I think would be a perfect place to do that, but I think that's a really good idea. We have just launched, as part of Bill's strategic initiative, the Transparency and Participation Call to Action, which is exactly designed to try and describe the narrative in the context of the economic benefits that David mentioned, but also more broadly, of course, most importantly, in the context of the human and benefits. And actually, I think the idea of framing it in the way you've suggested, which we sort of toyed with, is a really good one. So if I can take that away and work with those thoughts, that would be great. And just to say one thing over the whole issue of this data piece, perhaps picking up on the points over. This is really complicated. We try to make it as simple as possible, and oddly, of course, the argument to some extent can't be fought other than but made on a quite complex ground, because these are quite complex things. But one of the, however, I think we've learned a lot about communication over the last few weeks, and there are definitely things that I think we could have done better. The team has worked flat out, and Geraint Lewis and Chris Outram deserve enormous credit for the work that they've done in beginning the process rolling. But I noticed, for example, that a number of people have wondered why, to some extent, the opportunity for opt-out appears complex or difficult, because in fact the law says you have to go to your GP or ring your GP in order to register your decision to object. And I think that's something we will take away and try and develop. But I just wanted to reflect that we're a learning organisation, and the honest truth is that I think we've got a very strong story here. I think there are quite a few people who don't quite understand that for various reasons, and I think our communications probably could have been a bit better. But we're learning and willing, as we go along.
I'm anxious to bring this to a close.
Yeah.
Ros, did you wish to come in?
I just wanted to link this to the conversation we were having earlier about commissioning support. So I think that this, the ability to develop the intelligence about what's going on in the system is something that our commissioning support units are working on. And what I've seen is that one of our commissioning support units working with hundreds of practices, that by getting that data together, it means that GPs have been able to identify better how to look after their patients. And I think to the point that Bruce made, I think it sort of links for me what the importance of our commissioning support services in coupled with the work that Tim's doing to deliver better outcomes for people.
Good, okay. Tim, thank you very much for the report. I think I need to draw our discussion to a close as a risk of getting too exciting.